Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Marketing Made Easy podcast. I'm Josh Wadier, your host, and in today's episode, we're going to be covering a problem that I've been seeing become much more common recently, and it's involving podcasts. Because having a podcast is one of the best ways to market your business and bring in a consistent stream of leads. But a problem that I see a lot of business owners have is that they just don't know what they should make a podcast about. So today we're going to solve that problem. I'm going to walk you through how to pick a podcast topic for your business that's not only something that you'll love, but that's also something that'll make it really easy to monetize your podcast in the future. So, point number one is to figure out what you want to sell. Now, this is really important if you want to actually be able to make money and sell things on your podcast, because selling things is by far the best way, the most effective way to bring in an income from a podcast and to monetize it. And since you're a business owner, you probably already have things set up that you like to sell or do. So just pick something that you love selling, something that you love helping people with, a product that you have, whatever it is. Pick one thing that's going to be like your main selling point. And you can have other things you sell on the podcast, but you kind of want to have one main thing that you're always trying to drive people to. And then wherever other things fit in, you can do those as well. Now, when you're thinking about what product you're going to sell on your podcast, if you're trying to sell a product directly from your podcast, just have someone listen to your episode and go buy something, then you really need to keep your product under $300. $300 is about the limit of what people are willing to pay if they just listen to a podcast and then go and buy something. Now, you can still sell higher ticket items through your podcast, but you're not going to be doing it directly on your podcast. You're going to use your podcast as a lead generator. So what you're going to do is people will start listening to your podcast. They'll get warmed up to you. They'll get to know you really well. They'll get to the point where they trust you. And then you can start directing them to other places like Facebook groups or to webinars that you're doing or events you're doing, things like that are much easier to sell higher ticket items on. And you just use your podcast as a lead generator to get people to those places. So keep that in mind when you're choosing what type of offer you want to sell. If you want something that can just be easily, quickly sold directly from the podcast, then you need to try and keep the price lower. But if you have higher ticket items you want to sell, it's fine. Just use your podcast as a lead generator and don't expect to get direct sales on your podcast. So now that you have something chosen that you want to sell, that brings us to step number 2, which is to figure out who will buy it. Now, you may have already done some of this in your marketing for your products and services before, but it's really important to take a really deep dive into who the people are that will actually buy this. Who are your ideal clients? What do they want? And don't just think about like what types of needs they have, but also think about what types of things do they enjoy? What types of things do they listen to? Where do they go to have fun? Things like that. You want to get really well acquainted with who your ideal clients are, because those are going to be the people who are your ideal audience as well. So even if you do already know your ideal clients, it's still a good idea to take a look at this, spend some more time, and you can even go and ask some of the people who are your ideal clients what types of things they enjoy doing, where do they go, that kind of stuff. That will make the marketing process of your podcast so much easier. Step number 3 is to brainstorm topics that will attract that audience. So at this point, you know what you're selling, you also know who's going to buy it. So now it's just time to start thinking about what things you could create a podcast on that would attract your ideal audience. And since you've already done all of the research into them, you should know what they're interested in, what types of things they're searching for, what do they do for fun, and start thinking about what's a podcast that you can create that will fill one of those needs for them, and that will also attract that type of person that you want to be selling to. And another thing to keep in mind during this step is you also want to be thinking of a type of podcast that you're an expert on, something that you can talk about all day long, something that's really fun for you and that you know a lot about. Because a really important thing about selling on a podcast is that people only want to buy from people that they trust and that they know are going to get the job done. And if you can't show yourself as being an expert, then people probably aren't going to buy your products and services in the long run. Now, the good news is that it is really easy to be seen as an expert on a podcast. There's actually just kind of a widespread opinion that if you have a podcast, you are an expert. So you would need to actively disprove that for people to think you're not. But it's really good if you can pick a topic that you know enough about that you're confident talking about it, that you have like insider tips on, that when people hear you, they can tell, yeah, this person knows what they're talking about. This person obviously does this. They know all of this information. So they're someone that I can trust. So keep that in mind when you're picking your topic. At the end of this step, you should have a list of a couple different possible topics. That they may not all be perfect, but just think of some different things that you could do and put them on a list, and then we'll take those into step 4. So now that you have all of this information, you have these lists of possible topics, it's time to do some actual research on this. So step 4 is to do audience research on similar podcasts to see if your predictions about your ideal audience are correct. So all you have to do is go to other podcasts that are similar to some of the topics that you have put in there and see what type of audience is there. Are they actually the type of people that you're wanting to do? Because there are some times where we can think we know what our ideal audience is wanting, but it may not actually be true. So this is a crucial step to make sure that you're on the right track with this. So for each of the topics that you listed, just go and look at 2 or 3 different podcasts that cover very similar topics and see what type of audience is watching those. And if it is similar to your ideal audience, then that's a great sign that your predictions were correct, and that if you create a podcast on that topic, it will be attracting your ideal audience. But if you realize after looking at there that the type of people who are watching and commenting aren't actually the type of people that you want, then you can kind of put that topic aside because it's probably not going to bring in your ideal audience. All right, now take the list of podcast topics that you have left, and now it's time to start looking at other podcasts again, but in a different way. This time, I want you to start looking at all of the different podcasts that are around that topic and see if there's something you can do that will make that topic unique. So, for instance, when I decided that I was going to create this podcast, I was looking around and I know a lot about marketing. Specifically, me and my company focuses on video marketing and helping small businesses do that. And so I could have just said, well, I'm going to make a podcast about video marketing. But I looked at that, and if I just search for video marketing, there's 1,000 other podcasts that talk about video marketing. So to get yourself to stand out, you have to really focus on something specific that makes you unique. That's why instead of just saying, oh, we do video marketing on this podcast, our podcast is fully focused on not just how to do marketing, but how to make marketing easy. How can you take this gigantic thing that is marketing, that's complicated and time consuming, and make it something that is easy to implement and learn without taking all of your time and all of your effort and all of that. So what I want you to do is take your list of remaining topics and just start searching for that in the search bars of different podcast platforms and see what types of podcasts come up. And you may find that 1 or 2 of the podcast topics that you were thinking of have a lot of competition around them. And if that's the case, then that may not be the best option. Now, you could still be successful there, but it's probably going to take a bit longer for your podcast to grow since there's so many other podcasts out there around that topic. But if you find some that don't have quite as much, then those are kind of your ideal topics. And that leads us into step number 6. So now you probably only have 1 or 2 topics left. It's okay if you still have a couple more, but at this point, what I want you to do is just spend a week or 2 thinking about it. Because here's a problem that we see all the time when it comes to people starting podcasts. Most people will start a podcast and then they'll get within 5 to 10 episodes in, and then they'll either say, well, this isn't working, I'm not seeing the growth that I'm looking for, or they'll realize, I really don't like making episodes about this. I don't like talking about this topic, or this isn't bringing in my ideal audience. And so a lot of people, there's actually a term for it called pod fading, which is that a lot of people start a podcast and then within 10 or so episodes, they quit the podcast because of any of those reasons or a whole bunch of other reasons. So, what I really want you to think about is to just start looking at your topic and saying, is this something I really want to make a podcast about? Is this something that I could create episodes on for the next 5 years and still be okay with? Or is this something that I'm just kind of okay with? Or is it something that you really don't like? Because the big important part about picking a topic is it has to be something you love. If it is not something you love, you will not be passionate about it. And if you're not passionate about it, if you're just doing it just so that you can market, people see that and they don't like that. People are attracted to podcasts where the host of the podcast is passionate about what they do, where they love their job. They love being able to come and talk about these things. They love the topics that they're covering, all of that. So if the podcast that you have on your list, if one of them is something that you really don't like or you really don't think you could do long term, then that's not the topic that you should choose. So just take a while and think about it. Even if you have one that at first you're like, oh yeah, that's awesome. That's perfect. That's exactly what I need to do. Still, take some time and really think through that. Start thinking about what type of episode topics you could do for that and see how many you can come up with, or if you very quickly start running out of ideas, and start thinking about if you really enjoy talking about that. Is that something that's fun for you? Could you talk about this topic for hours on end without any trouble? Because if you're not at that point, then you can start a podcast with that. But I guarantee you one of two things is going to happen. Either you're not going to get the kind of success that you're wanting because you're not putting your full effort into it, or you're just really not going to enjoy it and are going to end up giving up in the long run. And now to the final step, which is to try it out and don't be afraid to pull the plug. So now that you have a podcast topic or maybe two podcast topics, and you've thought through them really well, and you think that, yeah, this is something that you could really enjoy, and it's something that's going to attract your ideal audience, something that you can sell your products and services on. Once you've gone through all of that and you think that you've found the perfect podcast topic, then try it out. Create a podcast about that and start creating content and just see how it goes. Create a couple episodes, see how it feels. Do you feel comfortable talking about this topic? Is it something that you really like talking about? Or after a while, does it get kind of tiring talking about it? Especially if you get to the point where you realize you're dreading every time that you have to go and make a podcast episode, then that's probably not a great pick for you. And so this is why I have the second part to this. Don't be afraid to pull the plug. Now, I will definitely say you need to get at least 15 to 20 episodes into your podcast before you start thinking about this, because you need to be able to get used to your podcast. You need to have a lot of content out there so your podcast will start to grow. But if you get 15 or 20 episodes into your podcast, and you really don't like it, or some things change and it's just not as exciting for you anymore, or you're dreading having to record every time, then go ahead and pull the plug and say, okay, this obviously isn't the topic for me, and try something else. That this way it'll make sure that you pick a topic that you do actually love, and that's something that you will want to keep making long term. So those are my tips on how to pick a great podcast topic for your business. So if this has been helpful to you, then make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. That way you'll be notified whenever we post a new episode. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.